Welcome back to the deep dive. If you're following us through the Prince's Playbook, we've really laid out the structural framework for great projects.
The bones of it, yeah.
Exactly. But today, well, today we hit the friction point, the bit that complicates even the best Gantt chart and, let's be honest, often determines if a project really succeeds. We're talking about people.
The human element. It really is everything, isn't it? I mean, the core mission, the whole point of a project is to deliver change.
Right.
And that change, it never just happens in isolation. It hits people directly, their routines, their day-to-day work, what PRINCE2 calls BAU, business as usual, their responsibilities, sometimes even how they feel valued in the organization. You can manage the technical product perfectly, but if you mess up the relationships, well, you haven't actually succeeded.
Okay, yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
We're aiming for adoption, for people actually using the thing, not just, ticking off the delivery.
Adoption, not just completion.
So when PRINCE2 talks about people, it's broader than just the project manager and their team, right? Who are we actually covering here?
It's definitely dual scope. On one hand, yes, you've got the internal project team managing the relationships between the people doing the work.
Okay.
But, and this is crucial, you also have to look at everyone who is impacted by what the project delivers.
Impacted. Okay.
And to really get a handle on this, we need to quickly touch on the two ecosystems they operate within. It helps frame where influence lies.
Right, the two ecosystems. They provide the context for how we interact, how we influence.
Precisely. So first you have the wider organizational ecosystem. Think of this as the whole environment, internal stuff like staff, the board, owners, but also external players like customers, suppliers, maybe even regulators. It's complex.
The big picture.
Yeah. Then you zoom in on the project ecosystem. This is the specific slice of the business that's directly involved in or immediately impacted by this particular project. Plus, of course, the relevant users and suppliers for this specific piece of work.
Okay. So knowing which ecosystem someone mainly sits in helps dictate your strategy with them.
Absolutely. It changes how you communicate, how you manage expectations, everything.
Got it. That distinction feels really key. So for this deep dive, we're honing in on three main pillars for managing this people factor.
That's right. We're looking at leading successful change, leading successful teams, and then communication, which really ties the other two together.
Makes sense. Let's start with leading successful change. This sounds like setting up the right structure to handle that inevitable tension that comes with change.
Structure is vital, yeah, but it has to support quick, informed decisions. The core principle here, is that decisions should ideally be made as close as possible to where the relevant knowledge actually sits.
Keep it local if you can.
Exactly. You only really escalate upwards when the potential impact crosses those ecosystem boundaries, say. It jumps from the project ecosystem into the wider organizational ecosystem, or if the decision gets tangled up in serious political or strategic stuff.
And that's management by exception, but applied to the governance structure itself.
You've got it. MBE in governance.
Okay, that sounds great in theory. But often you have multiple layers of management. How do you stop things getting bogged down in endless reporting or just stagnating? Our source material mentioned the find-us scenario. They had, 4 distinct governance layers?
They did.
How did they use MBE to actually manage delegation effectively across all those layers?
Well, FindDef really got that delegating authority isn't just about rules. It's entirely dependent on trust and the agreed tolerance for deviation at each level.
Okay.
So at the local level, the project board had the day-to-day operational control. Things like approving stage gates within tolerance, handling routine spending, picking standard suppliers, that kind of thing.
Standard stuff.
Right. But if, say, a stage deviation looked like it might risk the whole strategic objective of the project, well, that's when it had to move up.
Okay, so the next level up, the program board, they're looking more at the bigger picture, the portfolio health.
Precisely. The program board keeps an eye on the overall health of the program, manages tolerances across different projects, signs off major chunks of work, or tranches, that affect multiple projects at once.
But they wouldn't be making huge strategic investment calls?
No, they stop short of that. For example, if there was a massive financial shock, maybe a big scope change that needed an investment boost over, say, 20% of the original budget.
Where does that go?
That would escalate to the investment committee. They hold the purse strings for major financial changes.
Right.
And then only the really massive strategic choices like deciding to pivot the whole business into a completely new market or maybe dissolving an entire department structure, only that kind of thing reaches the leadership board right at the top.
So MBA works because everyone understands their swim lane, their boundaries,
Yeah,
which helps manage that hierarchical tension.
absolutely. Clarity reduces friction.
Okay, structure set. Now we need to look at change management itself.
Hmm.
This feels like where so many projects stumble not on the technical delivery, but on getting people to actually adopt the change.
Oh, absolutely. Think about the cost of failed adoption. Change management isn't just sending people on a training course. It's the whole mechanism, the process by which an organization transitions from how things are now to how they need to be.
The target state.
Exactly. And that captures shifts in routines, responsibilities, culture, even capabilities. If you fail here, people just drift back to the old, inefficient ways, and your whole business case evaporates.
Ouch. So the change management approach, which sits in the PID, the project initiation documentation, that has to really define this transition properly. What are the key things you need to really detail in that approach?
You need real clarity on a few things. What skills will people need in that target state? Which specific parts of the wider organizational ecosystem are going to be impacted? And critically, what key relationships do you absolutely need to get on board and keep strong?
Oh.
The document itself should really summarize the current state, any interim steps, and that target state specifically how people will work and behave differently in each. Plus, the enabling activities, things like tailored consultation, specific training plans, communication strategies.
That leads us neatly into stakeholders. We know the definition, anyone who can affect or be affected by the project. But PRINCE2 stresses identifying the critical ones, the key influencers, especially those who might not have a fancy job title.
Yeah, you're hunting for influence over adoption and perception. Senior execs are obviously vital, sure, but you need to dig deeper.
Where do you find these less obvious influencers?
Often you find critical influencers hanging out at the bottlenecks, places where information, knowledge, maybe even money tends to flow through specific people.
Like who?
Well, think about that long-serving document controller who knows where every historical decision is buried, or the commercial manager everyone has to go through for contract approvals, or maybe certain technical experts that everyone relies on for informal advice.
Ah, the gatekeepers and the gurus, the people who, even without formal authority, can either smooth the path or, throw sand in the gears.
Exactly, and they often shape how the majority of people perceive the project. So the fundamental takeaway here is your delivery gets dramatically better when you invest time to genuinely understand their perspectives, their constraints, what they care about.
And these relationships aren't static, right?
Not at all. They're dynamic. They can shift as the project moves through different stages, so you need to keep monitoring them, keep nurturing them.
Right. Let's shift gears to our second pillar, leading successful teams. This is about the internal dynamics, culture, and cohesion, especially in these temporary project setups.
Yeah, this is crucial. When you pull people together from different departments, different backgrounds, maybe even different companies, a new, distinct project culture has to emerge.
But it can't be totally separate from the main company culture.
No, that's the balancing act. It needs its own identity, its own ways of working suited to the project's goals, but it must stay aligned with the wider organizational ecosystem. You can't create a rogue state.
So how do you build that?
It starts right at the beginning, building a shared understanding with those key influencers we just talked about, getting agreement on the why and the how captured initially in things like the project brief. That shared understanding then guides decision-making at all levels as the project progresses.
What's the biggest red flag that your project's formal processes, the rules you wrote down in the PID, are actually clashing with how the team is really working with that emerging project culture?
It's often persistent non-compliance with the agreed-upon processes.
People just ignoring the rules.
Yeah, and it's tempting to just think, oh, these people are being difficult or they're not following procedure, but often it's a much deeper structural warning sign. It often means your defined ways of working, the ones you wrote down, are actually unaligned with the practical emerging culture of the team. They're not fit for purpose in reality. So you need to investigate that disconnect, understand why people aren't following the process, and maybe evolve the process itself rather than just punishing the behavior.
That's a really important distinction. Now, in these temporary teams, the project manager often finds themselves in a slightly odd position, right? They might be Managing people who are technically more senior in the hierarchy, or people juggling multiple reporting lines.
Absolutely. It's common.
This seems like where leadership really has to step up beyond just management.
Totally. The PM in these situations has to rely much more heavily on relational skills, on influence. We need to differentiate here. Management is essential. It's about instructing the execution of specific tasks, keeping things organized.
Making sure the work gets done.
Right. But leadership, especially in a project context, is more about motivating people towards that shared objective. It often involves deep collaboration, influencing without authority, co-creation. Influence becomes the real currency for a temporary team leader.
And to unlock that influence, to get people to really collaborate and be open, you absolutely have to build psychological safety.
That is the critical linchpin.
If people are afraid to speak up, afraid to admit mistakes or raise concerns, well, they won't report risks properly, will they? And that just cripples the project's ability to adapt and respond.
Couldn't agree more. A team needs to feel accepted, respected. They need to feel safe expressing diverse viewpoints, challenging ideas, admitting they don't know something, all without fear of being shot down or penalized.
Does PRINCE2 offer tools to help build that safety?
It does, indirectly maybe, but the products support it. The project plan provides that clear purpose and goals everyone can rally around. Role descriptions clarify expectations and can highlight training needs, reducing uncertainty. And the communication management approach should define how engagement and support will work. Even product-based planning, done well, helps by ensuring everyone agrees on what users actually need.
Okay, let's talk about building social cohesion then, especially now with so many teams being remote or hybrid. How do you build that trust and connection across different silos when people aren't physically together all the time? The Find of Two scenario in the source material touched on this. They had extreme program pressure, virtual exhaustion.
Yeah, Find of Two is a great example. They realized that just having scheduled work meetings wasn't enough to build real cohesion under pressure.
So what do?
They deliberately inserted a pause and reflect day between major stages, mandatory time off the usual tasks, dedicated purely to team building, reflection, and properly documenting lessons learned. It was about slowing down temporarily to speed up more effectively later.
That takes courage when you're under pressure.
It does. And critically, for their non-co-located teams, they did practical things like scheduling project update webinars at different times to suit global time zones, making sure everyone felt equally included, and they actively mandated virtual coffee time using their internal social platform, Unstructured Chat.
Deliberately creating space for that informal connection, that feeling of just knowing your colleagues as people.
Exactly, because that's what builds the trust, the cohesion, the resilience you need to push through the inevitable tough spots together.
You have to be intentional about it, especially when people are separated by geography or different reporting lines.
Absolutely. Cohesion doesn't just happen by accident in those situations.
Okay, final pillar. Communication, which, as you said earlier, has to be bidirectional. Projects naturally invite scrutiny, don't they? Change creates uncertainty, and uncertainty breeds rumors, misconceptions.
Precisely. If you don't communicate effectively, barriers go up almost immediately. That's why the communication management approach is so vital. Its purpose is to establish a controlled and, crucially, a bidirectional flow of information.
Not just broadcasting messages outward.
No, definitely not. It's just as much, if not more, about listening. About actively monitoring perceptions, understanding concerns, capturing feedback before it hardens into major risks or outright resistance.
So the approach itself, it details things like the stakeholder analysis, the schedule for comms, the channels, the responsibilities, standard stuff.
Yeah.
But we know that just sending out generic emails or newsletters often fails. Why is that?
It fails because information rarely travels in a straight line. People get information or misinformation from multiple sources, formal channels, informal chats, the grapevine.
The rumor mill.
Exactly. So your messaging has to be tailored. It needs to address the specific concerns of different communities or stakeholder groups. And this is where those key influencers become absolutely vital again. You need them involved. You need their help to shape the messages so they resonate locally, and you need them to act as credible advocates within their own networks. They lend authenticity.
I found the tactic mentioned in the source, the quiet phase, really interesting, especially for projects that are complex or maybe politically sensitive.
It can be a very useful risk mitigation tactic. Think about the Louis Shopping Buildybrook scenario. They had a project construction work that was inevitably going to cause physical disruption to the local community.
Right. Noise, traffic, mess.
All of that. If they'd communicated too early, when the plans were still vague or likely to change, it would have just caused panic, probably generated loads of organizational friction, unnecessary change requests, just chaos.
So Buildy-Brick deliberately kept quiet initially, while they firmed up the scope internally.
Exactly. They used that quiet phase to get their own ducks in a row, and then once they had a clearer picture, they established a proper, full communication strategy.
And what was the genius move there?
The genius move was actively inviting local key influencers, community leaders, maybe local business owners, to their monthly planning meetings.
Really, giving them a seat at the table.
Effectively, yes. They co-created the communication messages and decided on the best formats together. By turning potential critics into co-authors of the communication plan, they built ownership and massively reduced the risk of damaging misinformation spreading.
That's smart, turning critics into partners.
It builds immense trust. And a final check on communication. Please, never rely solely on your formal, periodic progress reports.
Why not?
Because they are always subject to filtering and bias as they go up the chain. People naturally want to present things in the best light.
Sure.
Strong relationships and proactively monitoring the health of those key relationships that gives you much more genuine, unfiltered feedback pathways. And if you do find pockets of resistance, don't see it just as a failure. See it as a useful indicator. It's telling you exactly where your communication efforts need to focus next.
Okay, that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
Let's try and tie all this back to the core PRINCE2 framework. People aren't just a separate work stream, are they? They're woven into the whole structure, the principles, practices, processes.
Oh, absolutely foundational. I mean, the principle-defined roles, responsibilities, and relationships is obviously all about people. It ensures the people factor is constantly considered, but it permeates the others too.
Okay, give me an example. How does something like staff resistance, clearly a people factor impact, say, ensure continued business justification?
Well, think about it. The business justification relies on aligning the interests of the business, the users, and the suppliers to achieve benefits. If staff resistance is really high, if users are refusing to adopt the new process or system,
Then the perceived value plummets.
exactly, the justification can become purely perception-based. Poor communication, a toxic project culture, lack of buy-in, these people issues can actively destroy the business case, even if the technical product itself is flawless.
Wow. Okay. What about learn from experience?
That absolutely requires collaboration. You can write lessons down in a log, sure, but real social learning is vital. Things like effective team behaviors, navigating the project culture, building strong working relationships, that stuff is really hard to capture properly in a document.
It's learned through doing, through watching others.
Exactly. It's best learned socially, through shared experience. And that requires an environment where people feel safe enough to talk honestly about what worked, what didn't, including failures.
Makes sense. And managed by stages. How does that connect?
Stage boundaries are natural checkpoints for people, too. They're ideal moments for the project board to review the skills and competencies needed for the next phase of work.
Ah, so you could adjust the team.
Precisely. It allows them to make sure the right people with the right skills and relationships are in place to manage the project effectively for the upcoming stage. You can adapt the team composition or even tweak the governance structure if needed.
Okay, let's circle back to managed by exception, MBS. You mentioned it earlier in governance. The now blue scenario from the source material seemed to paint MBI as more of a relational contract than just a hard rule.
That's the key insight there, absolutely. The level of delegation you grant under MBE isn't just about the rules, it depends heavily on the confidence and trust that exists in that specific relationship.
How did that play out in the now B case?
Well, the scenario described a contracted project manager who tailored their supervision based on a realistic assessment of each team member's capability. There was one team member who was highly skilled, a really fast learner.
Yep.
That person was managed strictly by exception. The expectation was, you're capable, make the decisions within your tolerance, just let me know if something deviates, minimal interference.
I trust high delegation.
Right. But then there was another person, a campaign specialist, who was very knowledgeable in their area, but maybe lacked broader project coordination skills.
So less delegation there.
Much closer management. More direct instruction, more frequent check-ins. Delegation was personalized based on assessed capability and the level of trust built. M/E isn't one size fits all.
Right, so MBI is actually a flexible tool driven by human performance and trust, not just the org chart. Okay, last one. Focus on products. How does the people factor enhance that principle?
By emphasizing the co-creation of product descriptions. When you involve the key people from the business, user, and supplier communities in defining what the product needs to be and how it will be quality checked.
You get buy-in from the start.
Exactly. It unites those different perspectives, ensures the product description actually reflects genuine operational needs, and it immediately starts building that sense of ownership. That leads to much better adoption and usually smoother handover and maintenance after the project finishes.
This has been incredibly insightful. So if we boil it down, the key takeaways seem to be, first, people are the ones who actually deliver and adopt change. So managing relationships is paramount.
Yeah.
Second, project leadership, especially in temporary teams, relies heavily on influence, collaboration, and those relational skills, not just formal authority.
Influence is key.
And third, communication has to be genuinely bidirectional, as much about listening and understanding concerns as it is about broadcasting messages.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So what's the final thought you want to leave our listeners with, especially those studying PRINCE2 or managing tricky projects right now?
I think the final thought, particularly if you're dealing with complex change that cuts across different parts of an organization or involves external partners, is this. Leading successful change requires cultural intelligence.
Cultural intelligence.
Yeah. It's that capability to relate and work effectively across the diverse cultures that exist within the wider organizational ecosystem. You know, the way the operations team thinks might be very different from the finance department, or an external supplier might have completely different priorities. Cultural intelligence means setting clear project boundaries, but also being able to adapt your communication style, to genuinely understand different perspectives, and to be acutely aware of the competing constraints and pressures that other people are working within.
Because understanding those constraints is fundamental to being able to influence effectively and ultimately ensuring your project stays justified and delivers real value.
Exactly that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the crucial people element of the method. Now go out there, apply these insights, and lead with influence.